Welcome all, and yeah, congratulations again for those who have already cleared our practitioner certification, and all the best for everyone who are going to attempt it in near future. So today we'll start with Solution Architect Associate, and this is mainly for people who are technical. Non-technical people are more than welcome to continue. But this is would be mainly for the technical folks. This will require a lot of a deep understanding technical concepts as well as the hands-on exercises. So when it comes to Solution Architect Associate exam, it's not going to be as straightforward as Cloud Practitioner exam. In Cloud Practitioner, we had very clear guidelines on what exact topics we should be studying and stuff. We do have an indicative guideline here for Solution Architect Associate, which we will look in a moment. But it mainly revolves around the concepts of resiliency, performance, cost optimization, security, rather than individual services or individual concepts. So look into how to start preparing for Solution Architect Associate. Let's go into the AWS site, aws.amazon.com certification prep, foundational level certification. We have already completed. So we will start with associate level certifications. So as we saw that we took around like 4 weeks of preparation for Cloud Practitioner. In associate level certification for Solution Architect Associate, and depending upon your individual pace and how much time you will be able to devote, I would say around 4 to 6 weeks should be a good time to prepare for it. Then probably a couple of weeks to revise and practice stress, that will help. So around 8 weeks time, like 2 months, should be good for Solution Architect Associate exam. But having said that, do take your time for Solution Architect Associate. It does require a lot of deep understanding of groups. Yeah, if everybody can go on mute, that will be great. Cool, thanks. So when it comes to like studying, as you see, all the trainings that are there are mainly classroom, so there will be no digital training freely available for AWS Solution Architect Associate. That was there for Cloud Practitioner. There are a lot of paid courses, whether it is by Linux Academy or a Cloud Guru or Digital Cloud. There are a lot of available of them in Udemy. It's by Ryan Kurenberg of Cloud Guru, or Adrenil by Linux Academy, or Stephen Marek, or they are test papers. Those can definitely help. Otherwise, I'll be probably giving you all the resources of how you can use the free ones to do. So for learning white papers perspective, it is just AWS well architected white paper, and that goes into pretty much deep. But these are really important FAQs. So for me, FAQs has really helped me to crack both associate level examination and professional level exam, very frankly. So whatever specific FAQs they are mentioning here, going through all the FAQs would be like time consuming, probably a bit boring and tiresome also, but it really helps in deep understanding and from the exam perspective also. But we'll see how we can skim through them quickly, or the important points where exactly we should be focusing on. But yes, these are the services that are recommended. EC2, which is mainly compute, S3, which is mainly storage, and give a more focus to Glacier here in for Solution Architect Associate. Then VPC, Route 53, RDS, which will be mainly for your database, and SQS, mainly for your decoupling your applications. And we'll look into these in more detail of how exactly we should be preparing for Solution Architect Associate. Okay, so from the exam guide perspective, so here is the exam guide that is there for Solution Architect Associate exam. I will say we'll go back again to the domain. So if you see, there are 4 domains: design resilient architectures, design high performing architectures, design secure applications and architectures, and design cost optimized architectures. and these would be forming. So as you see, there is no specific services that they have mentioned. There are no specific, concept. They're already high level concept, and they're going to judge your knowledge in architecting these, a specific scenario using the AWS services based on these parameters, whether they are resilient, whether they are high performant, whether they are secure, whether they are cost optimized. So let's go into each of them, like designing resilient architectures, design a multi-tier architecture solution, and we'll look into this in today's session. Uh, but what exactly does a resilient architecture would mean? That would mean that uh, you have an application which needs to be multi-tiered. And when I say multi-tiered, it means that all of the different components of the application should not be boxed into one server, and they should be fanned out into multiple tiers and deployed so that each of the tiers can be auto scaled uh, or load balanced independently. Designing a highly available or fault tolerant architectures, this would be mainly that in case if there is any issue either with a specific component of the application or with the overall infrastructure as a whole, still the application should be up and running. So here your multi availability zones would come into place. Either here your load balancing and auto scaling groups will come into picture. We'll look into all those. Designing decoupling mechanism. So decoupling mechanism is really important in terms of designing the microservices architecture or creating an application which are not tightly coupled. So here SQS would be one of the important uh, service or AWS service that will be helpful in decoupling your application. And then choosing a appropriate resilient storage. So it all depends upon your use case or use case based on which storage you will be using, whether it is EBS, EFS, or S3. I see there is a question by Sesgain that is EBS included in SD. So EBS is a storage which is mainly attached to a EC2 instance. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by is EBS included in EC2. From the pricing perspective, it depends upon how much EBS volume storage you will be using or what kind of volume type you would be using. In terms of documentation, I'll have to check where exactly, but yeah, EC2 would be having EBS and EC2 are closely related, so you might be able to find both of them together. But having said that, EC2 is more of a compute, and ABS is storage for that compute. And then designing high performance architectures. Now here again, as it is a high performance, you'll have to see that when case you have let's say a web application, and this web application has a increased traffic, then your web application should be very much like responsive, depending upon how much time each of your layer is taking to execute that particular functionality. So here again, elastic and scalable compute solutions. So here we'll talk about vertical and horizontal scaling. As we know that vertical scaling is good, but it has its own limits. So it's horizontal scaling. But when it comes to horizontal scaling, we'll have to think about many other things like session state management or in between transactions and stuff. Those things will be taken care of here. Then again, high performing and scalable storage solutions, network solutions, and database solutions. So if you see, it all revolves around the core services, whether it is compute, whether it is storage, whether it is networking, whether it is databases. And we will talk about each of the individual services that would be required for compute, storage, networking, or database. For compute, it will be EC2 or serverless like Lambda. For storage, it will be S3, EBS, EFS, or storage gateway in case if there is a hybrid solution, like you have a data center as well as AWS, and you need a connectivity between both of them. So you have some storage within your data centers and some storage within AWS. Networking solutions, again, it will be like VPC, whatever we have seen in Cloud Practitioner, security groups, or network ACLs or VPC peering. Transit gateway will go here more advanced into things like Route 53 or CloudFront, or like a site-to-site VPN or direct connect, the ways to connect our on-premise data center to AWS. Then we have database solutions. So we'll be having SQL databases, NoSQL databases. For SQL databases, we have RDS. For NoSQL, we have DynamoDB. For data warehouses, we have Redshift. Then we have Elastic Cache. So we'll look into all that in databases. So it will be so more of the for solution architect associate, it's more of understanding the scenarios, and based on the scenarios, coming up with a design which meets the specific criteria, that whether it is the most fault tolerant solution, or whether it is the most high performing solution, or is it the most cost effective solution, or is it the most secure solution. So it will mainly be based on these four core principles, and understanding which one to choose when, and how each one of it should be used based on the specific scenario. Then it comes to secure applications. Security, as you said, like whether it is IAM, or whether it is a network security, whether it is securing each and every a tier of application. There are multiple options that will be there, and we'll have to dive deep into each one of those. Then coming to the cost optimization architectures, then here it will be again things like the reserved instances would be coming into picture, that based on a specific scenario, whether you would be going for an on-demand or whether you're going for reserved instances. For the cost-effective solution, for storage solution of cost-effective, again it will be depending upon the multiple storage tiers that we have, that if a storage is a non-critical, probably you will be going for S3, infrequently accessed one zone. If it is for a critical, you will be going for S3 standard. If it's for archival, you might be choosing Glacier. So it will depend upon what exact scenario it is. So these are the four different domains, and as we see here, it just gives you a very indicative. So there is no set pattern uh, in which you would be like studying. So what I try and did is that I created a kind of a Excel, which I'll be sharing for each of the categories, that what all we should be focusing on, and hopefully that will help us in structuring our course in a way, or you guys can think about in which week you want to study what. As I said, depending upon your pace, 4 to 6 weeks of study along with the hands-on labs would be really helpful, and then couple of weeks for like revising everything and giving some practice tests. Okay, so let me zoom in a bit to show here more. Everyone see the screen? Is the font size okay? Cool. So for the compute services, as I said, we'll be having EC2 and Lambda. In EC2, again, the focus would be, can everyone go on mute, please? I can see some. Thank you. For compute, for example, for EC2 and Lambda, EC2 is mainly AWS virtual machine. Again, here the talks would be upon the instance types. It comes in both ways, whether which instance family you're talking about, based on the memory and the course that you need. I'm not going very deep into that of learning all the instance families, but understanding the different type of instance families that we have. Instant types would be very important in terms of whether when would you go for on demand, when you would go for reserved instances, when you would go for spot instances. That will be really helpful. Bastion host would be a concept that is important in terms of security. I will talk about that. Then load balancers this will be very important. So we have classic load balancers, we have application load balancers, we have network load balancers. Understanding the differences between these and when to use what. Then it will be auto scaling groups. Auto scaling groups and load balancers, understanding the difference between the two. So auto scaling group is more about you set a defined minimum and maximum parameter for the number of instances that you would need, and based on the load, the auto scaling group is going to scale up or down your instances. So how to set up that, how to set up the health check for each of these load balancer and auto scaling grips. And then there are separate different types of scaling policies, step scaling policies or dynamic scaling policies. So all those would be important in auto scaling groups. Then we have elastic beanstalk. Elastic beanstalk, I would say it's instead of here, it should be here as a separate compute. So Elastic Beanstalk gives you a way to directly deploy it onto the underlying EC2 instances, and it manages a lot of administrative tasks on your behalf, instead of you yourself have to do on your own when you do it on EC2. Then Lambda, it takes the abstraction to another level. Actually, it allows you to give you upload the code, and it is going to execute the code. You need not have to worry about the underlying infrastructure or how to provision it and how to maintain it, and you pay it for the amount of duration that is going to be executed. So you need to understand when to use what, how they work. That will be important for the compute. Then let's come to storage. So for storage, S3 would be the most important topic, and you'll have to understand that in detail. I would say go for the hands-on labs, and I'll be sharing with you few hands-on labs for these. This will be really important to understand in and out, not only for solution architect associate, but in terms of in general, if you are planning your career towards AWS architect, then this would be really important. Again, the storage classes, understanding each of the storage class that we have: S3 standard, S3 infrequently accessed, S3 infrequently accessed one zone, S3 intelligent tier, Glacier, Glacier deep archive. So all of those. And Glacier, just focus more on Glacier, Glacier deep archive, the features in each of them. And then the lifecycle policies, how to set the lifecycle policies so that the data that is there in a specific storage class can move between the storage classes. That, for example, for 7 years it will stay in S3 standard, and then after 7 years that data item would be moved automatically to the Glacier. Or based on the scenario, you'll have to understand these lifecycle policies and come up with the best solution. Then the batch operations of S3, so like you have like hundreds of files you need to upload, then how are you going to upload that? Or in case of you have a very large file, then how can you do a multi-part upload? So in S3 there is an option that you can do. Let's say there is a very big file, you can multi-part upload. So each of the chunk of that particular big file will be uploaded parallelly to S3, and then it will be remerged there. So those kind of functionalities is helpful to understand. Then cross-region replication. This is mainly again when it comes to like a high availability. Then cross-region replication of the data will be very important, so that the data is preserved, whether it is for disaster recovery. Then here I would say play with CLI commands of S3. We did set up AWS CLI during our cloud practitioner certification, so use that to play with S3. Like let's say you have a bucket set up in one region, and you want that bucket to be synced with a bucket in another region. How are you going to do that? Using AWS CLI. Those will be really helpful. S3 transfer acceleration, it's another a way to accelerate the data transfer from S3 to the end user where the user is. So we'll look into that. Then with every action in a S3 there is an event, and how we can configure those events to invoke a Lambda to do any specific task. Let's say, for example, a very simple use case might be that someone is uploading image onto your S3 bucket. You need to create the thumbnails of those images. Those images might be of very high resolution, and you need to just create a thumbnails of those and show it in your, let's say, website. Then how are you going to create a thumbnails of those? You can always invoke a Lambda, which is going to create a less resolution image of the existing image and save it in another bucket, which will be a thumbnail bucket. So how to configure those things? How to use S3 as a static asset source for a multi-tier website. So all your static images, or you can, if you have a static website altogether, You can configure S3 as it is for your S3. You did not need any compute services for creating a static website. You can create all your files, your HTML files, your images, save it in S3, host it as a public website, and that can be done. In case if you have a multi-tier architecture, then also it's always good to have your static websites onto S3, static assets onto your S3, and serve it from there, rather than saving your static assets onto some other volume and deliver them via EC2. This way is much more cost effective and much more maintainable. So we'll look into those things. Then how would you like to set up a CloudFront in front of a S3 and then create a pre-signed URL so that you can distribute your content? So there will be a lot of focus on S3 in your examination, and in terms of general knowledge also it is really good. Then EBS and EFS both again are different types of storage systems. So we need to understand what is the difference between them and when to use what, how to like snapshot, copy, restore, how to make each of these volumes resilient, and use it for like either highly available or disaster recovery for those things. Different type of volume types that you have in EBS, that will be really important. Understanding those concepts, understanding the IOPS concepts, and then finally IO credits and bus performance. This is extension of the IOPS concepts that we'll be looking, and this will be useful. Then it comes to storage gateway. Storage gateway is a way for a hybrid solution. You have an on-premise, you have AWS, then your data would be at both the ends. Then how can you have a layer in between them so that the data can be accessed from AWS to data center and vice versa. So there are different gateway types based on the use case. We need to understand what are the different gateway types. There are 3 gateway types, the features of each of them, and when to use what. So there might be a scenario based question on that. Then Snowball, it's a family in which you need to transfer a large amount of data from your on-prem to AWS. Then Snowball family comes into picture. So the difference, understanding the difference even between the Snowball and storage gateway will be important. Snowball is mainly for data transfer, and storage gateway is mainly for sharing the data that is there on the on-prem. And then FSX is also another concept that we will have to understand at a high level, at least for the solution architect associate. Then coming to networking. So networking, these are topics that we covered in solution architect associate, but we'll have to go a bit deeper if you have not already gone into understanding even the basic difference between security group and NACL to the advanced differences. You need to understand them in and out. Create as many VPCs as possible on your own. Get really comfortable creating VPCs from scratch, whether it is root tables, whether it is internet gateway, NAT gateways, NAT instances, setting up security group, network ACLs. And then there'll be a few advanced concepts like VPN and Direct Connect. It's mainly again for hybrid solutions. So there will be a lot of focus in solution architect associate even on the hybrid solutions and scenarios on how to secure your data in hybrid solution, or how would you transfer data at a in a cost effective manner in a hybrid solution. So VPN is mainly a software-based site-to-site connection, and Direct Connect is actually a hardware-based tunneling that we put between the on-prem data center and AWS. Then there will be concepts of VPC endpoints, and this will be a really important concept. For example, you have a resource in your VPC which wants to talk to a database, let's say DynamoDB. Then DynamoDB, you would not like it to be accessed publicly, so you will have to put it inside a VPC. So how these can interact with each other, we can create a VPC endpoint for each of the services, and there are different types of VPC endpoints, interface endpoints and gateway endpoints, and we'll talk about that in detail. NAT gateway NAT instances, yes, you guys should be at least aware of what exactly they are in Cloud Practitioner certification itself, but we'll look into more detail if that is required. Then VPC peering and transit gateway. So if two or three VPCs needs to talk to each other, then we need to create a VPC peering between these VPCs. And VPC peerings are not transitive. So if A is paired with B and P is paired with C, then A and C cannot directly talk to each other unless A and C are also paired. So this is okay if we have 3 or 4 VPCs, but let's say if we have hundreds of VPCs in our enterprise, then it will be really difficult to have this n-way peering between each VPC. And that's where transit gateway comes into picture. So we look into scenarios of when we should be using transit gateway versus when we should be using VPC peering. And then in networking, we have concepts like CloudFront. We'll look into a bit detail more, but we'll focus a lot on Route 53. So Route 53 is a domain name resolution service, you can say. So 53 is a DNS port, and that's how it gets the name of Route 53. That what exactly is Route 53? It's a domain name resolution, a service from AWS, and we look into, and it also does a lot of load balancing and routing. So we'll look into a different strategies that Route 53 has. And then there is a concept called Global Accelerator, and we look into difference between the CloudFront and Global Accelerator. Even CloudFront is used; it's a CDN, content delivery network. So CloudFront is used for delivering the content faster to the end users. But then we have something called Global Accelerator. So we need to understand the difference between the both. So there's a lot of stuff to cover even in the networking part. Then we have a database, and in a database, again, so RDS I would say is one of the most important one. So even if you remember from the FAQs, RDS was one of the parts. So we need to have the FAQs of EC2, S3, RDS. So RDS was one of that. So in RDS, it is very important to understand like multi-AZ deployments, that how to create a master slave setup in RDS. What is synchronous replication? What is asynchronous replication? When is synchronous replication used? When is asynchronous replication used? Read replicas is another concept. How to increase the performance using read replicas? How to achieve high availability using multi-AZs? These are the concepts that we need to understand. And these are very easy to configure. Even when you will do labs, you'll understand that these are literally a check boxes that you need to check uh, to configure these, and then these will be really useful for increase, like for high availability and increasing the performance. And then they'll be, like understanding the basic concepts of RTO and RPO, that based on the RTO and RPO requirements. And I'm hoping everyone understands RTO and RPO here. If not, probably when we'll be going to the database sessions, so I'll be probably talking about RTO and RPO in more detail. This is recovery time objective and recovery point objective, which are like the basic concepts in terms of disaster recovery. Then it comes to automated backups, snapshots, copy and restore. So based on the RTO and RPO requirements, we'll see that whether we need to configure the automated backups, for how long these backups are taken, how are they taken and stuff, or we need to create a strategy for a manual snapshots, and then copy and restore, how they can be taken, how they can be restored. And then again, it is like single region, multi-region, single availability zone, multi-availability zones. So all these concepts would be important to understand. Then comes the DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL use case. So RDS is more of a SQL offering. So and DynamoDB is a NoSQL offering from AWS. So I'm assuming most of you do understand the SQL concept, but NoSQL, there might be few people who might not have worked on NoSQL yet. It is a bit different concept. The SQL is based on ACID principles, and NoSQL is based on the base principles. But we'll talk about those when it's required. So DynamoDB is a NoSQL database offering, and here we need to understand about how DynamoDB is structured, what are partition key and sort keys. Like in SQL Server, we have primary keys, we have indexes. In DynamoDB, we have mainly partition key and sort key. Then we'll talk about eventual versus strong consistency reads. Then we have eventual consistency and strong consistency. there's a lag when there is anything written to a NoSQL database, then it gets replicated across multiple nodes in across multiple availability zones. That introduces a small delay in getting that particular item that is written committed to each and every node. And based on the kind of read you need to configure whether it is okay for you to have eventual consistency read that eventually every node would be in sync, or in case if you want to have a strong consistency read, so in case if you need a immediate read after a write, then you'll have to go for strong consistency. um, if it is not even immediate, then you can go for eventual consistency read, and we'll see how we can achieve that by setting up RCUs and WCUs, which is read capacity units and write capacity units, and we'll have to understand how those are calculated, read capacity units and write capacity units. Then comes the Elastic Cache. Elastic Cache again is a way to increase your performance of the database by placing a Elastic Cache in front of your database, or even it is used to put in front of your application layer. So here again, we to understand the use case, when to use and what to use. There's a lot of comparison between when to use Elastic Cache versus when to use DynamoDB, for example, in saving a session state. So whether we should be saving the session state in Elastic Cache or a DynamoDB, there are a lot of questions there on that. And then there are two types of Elastic caches that are supported by AWS, Redis and Memcached. So we need to understand the difference between these two offerings and the differences, and kind of the use case in which when are you going to use Redis versus when are you going to use Memcached. Then Aurora is is a SQL database offering from AWS. It's a cloud native database in terms of it has been designed from scratch, reimagining how the database should be for the cloud. It supports MySQL and PostgreSQL. So in case if you have MySQL or PostgreSQL databases, you can seamlessly migrate to Aurora, and they take benefits of a cloud native database. So it's kind of an extension of RDS. So RDS mainly supports 5 different SQL engines, whether it is SQL Server, Aurora, Postgre, MySQL, or MariaDB. And the sixth one would be Aurora, which is in itself supports MySQL and PostgreSQL. Then we have Redshift, which is mainly a data warehousing solution for OLAP transactions. So there are primarily two types of queries that are generally there, which is OLTP and OLAP. So RDS is mainly for OLTP, which is online transaction processing, and Redshift is mainly for data warehouse, which is OLAP, online analytical processing. A DMS is a database migration service, and this is a service that is used to migrate your data from your existing database to your target database, and we'll look into it briefly. Then we need to look into the security. Again, IAM is really important, how to configure that, and we will talk about a lot of in the policies. So like we, for everything we do set up policies, and the policies are written in JSON, so we need to understand the structure of the JSON. For solution architect, it was not required for cloud practitioner, but for solution architect associate, you'll need to understand that specific JSON based policies, resource policies, that what each of the tag means, what tags are mandatory, what are optional, and how to configure that. Then we have something called SCP, which is service control policies, which is mainly for if you want to create one policy and attach it to multiple accounts, or like the way you set up your organizations. Then we have WAF and Shield. It's web application firewall and Shield. These are mainly, you need to understand the difference between the two, why are they used, and the use cases. Like in case if you need to prevent any cross-shell scripting attacks, then it will be like WAF. In case if you want to prevent DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, then it will be Shield. KMS, key management service, it is mainly for your encryption. then how to use it, where to use it, how to manage customer keys, how to import customer keys, and all those things would be through KMS. Then we have a service called Secret Manager. It is mainly for saving your secrets or strings which needs to be secure. You can save it via Secret Manager, and it does give a lot more functionality than just saving strings securely. And then Cognito, which is AWS service mainly for authentication authorization. It does act as IDP, which is identity provider, and it can does do a federation. That is, say you have your all your uh, uh, users login ID and passwords in a specific third-party database, or let's say if you want to log in to your website through a Facebook or Google login, you can use Cognito inbuilt features to create a website in which you can offload all your user authentication and authorization uh, through Cognito. So that will be security stuff. And then we do have other AWS services that will be important. As I said, SQS would be really important to understand. There are two types of SQS flavors in AWS. We need to understand what those are, what are the difference, when to use when. SNS, we need to understand the difference between SQS and SNS, and when you would be using SQS versus when we be using SNS. Similarly, we have Kinesis, which is again a data stream technology. We need to understand what are the scenarios when Kinesis would be used and how it is used. Then we have API gateway. We need to understand, we will talk about the full serverless sections, and API gateway will be part of that. And the API gateway can be used independently also. Then organizations, we touched upon these briefly in our cloud practitioner. We'll have to go a bit more deeper into organizations, and we have to understand the organizations along with the SCPs to understand how we can control multiple accounts in a large organization. Then we have systems manager. Systems manager is a quite important concept, and it is focus a lot more in solution in, I would say, SysOps administrator associate examination, a SysOps associate examination rather than solution architect associate. But having said that, this is quite important to understand, and it will be really useful when you will be actually working on AWS. There's a lot of things that can be done from system manager itself. Then our usual services like CloudWatch, CloudTrail, these are really important and to understand the differences between them, when to use which. If you want a host level metrics, what to use. If you want API level metrics, what to use. Those kind of understanding should be there. And then Opworks is again one of the service through which you can deploy and you can maintain your infrastructure. So understanding how that works. Then we have CodeStar. It's a full a family of your CI/CD pipeline. AWS does provide a family of services through which you can create a CI/CD pipeline. If you're using, let's say, Jenkins or Azure DevOps, a similar thing can be done in AWS using code commit, code pipeline, code deploy. This is a lot more focus in developer associate exam, but we should be understanding about these even in solution architect associate, probably not as in deep as in developer associate, but still at the surface level we should be understanding the basic difference, what are the underlying technologies that are used. For example, code commit is based on the Git itself, and how we can integrate other services into these pipelines. Then we have step functions, which is again more of a way to orchestrate your serverless applications, and we'll look into this. So this overall should give you what do you call a high level view of what all you should be focusing on. And this by no means is the most exhaustive thing. There are other things that you should be focusing on, but this is where the majority should be actually covered with that. And now it will basically depend upon individual to individual preference of how we would like to go ahead and prepare. Like for cloud practitioner, I gave a set pattern that you should focus on this on week 1, on this on week 2, and week 3 and week 4. Here there is no specific prescription of that, because quite of things are kind of intermingled. But in case if you want to have a kind of a high level plan, then you can go for each week for each service, like compute 1 week, storage another week, go for networking for another week, database like fourth week, and fifth week you can have security other services. So you see that it's even if you give 1 week for each of these core services, in which you'll have to go into really deep understanding, like all the different available services for that particular core service, and then understanding the differences between each of them and doing the hands-on labs. It's quite a lot of work that will be need to be done for like preparing well for solution architect associate. But yeah, on a high level, you can and no specific order, I would say you can go for one specific core service before the other. My personal preference, I would say I would go for probably networking as my first one, because that forms the basics. Then I'll go for compute, then I would go for storage, and then I would go for database, and then yeah, security and other services we can keep adding on top of them. Hopefully that gives you a good idea overall. And I see there is a question: is Cognito proprietary to AWS, or it works with other clouds too? I'll have to come back on that. I've not used Cognito for other clouds, but yeah, I'll have to check that if I need to and see how it can be done with other cloud. Okay. Now, before going into specific topic for today, I would like to show you a place where you can do a hands-on, at least, which can help you doing the hands-on. It will be helpful if everyone can go on mute, please. Okay. So yeah, quick labs. So this is a place where you'll be able to find a lot of labs. Amazon.quicklabs.com, and I'll be sharing that link. So here, if you see, you need to log in with any of your email ID, and that should give you access to these. And there are a lot of introductory level sessions which are there, which will be helpful for you. For example, introduction to IAM, introduction to simple storage, or the Lambda or DynamoDB. You would be able to do a lot of hands-on here. Or you can always use this. For example, I'll go to catalog, and you will see that not all of them are free here. So there are few which are free, and there are few for which you need credits. But having said that, the credits are mainly required if you want to do the labs here, but you can always do the labs on your own in your free tier. It totally up to you. For example, if I go to serverless web apps using Amazon DynamoDB, so I can always enroll in this quest, but that is okay. It's more for learning than any quest. So here, these introduction to DynamoDB, it will be a good example. You can always go ahead, click here, and you can do a lab from here itself. You can create a start lab and do it here itself, or no need to use the specific lab. You can always, there are full instructions provided here. You can use your free tier account, but yeah, be very careful by using free tier account to ensure that you are not using any of the non-free tier account functionalities. And you have a detailed step of how you can do and what you can do, and you can use these to do a hands-on labs. We will not be having enough time to doing hands-on labs here during the sessions. I'll be mainly introducing you with the concepts, but these hands-on labs should be helping you to understand. So for example, I talked about partition key and sort key in a DynamoDB. So this, using these hands-on labs, you'll be able to actually configure them and understand why a specific column is good for a partition key and why a specific column is good for a sort key. Even for the ones which require credits, for example, let's say this one, This requires 1 credit. Serverless Dynamo web apps using DynamoDB. Uh, if you try and do the lab from here, it will ask you to purchase the credits, which you can go to your account and you can purchase, or you can use your free tier account to do the labs on your own by following all the instructions that are available here. So try doing this. If you're stuck anywhere, do let me know, and we can do a couple of them together here with everyone. I know it all depends upon how much time you're able to invest on your own, but these labs will be helpful. Let's see which all labs you should guys be focusing on. So if you go to catalog, there'll be too many labs. So let's say I'll just have 15 one page. Let's see which one we should be going. Security in AWS, this is actually important. You should be going ahead and doing this for sure, like priority 0. I would say this is like priority 1. If you are able to do it, great. If not, then it's fine. I would leave this. I'll not go for Alexa development as of now, unless you're going for Alexa specialty. Serverless Database Lambda, I think it will be covered here. Web apps using DynamoDB. So this I would say would be optional. Advanced operation with Amazon Redshift not required. Anything that is advanced would not be required for Solution Architect Associate. That will be mainly for professional and beyond. But yeah, go ahead and do it in case if you're in this data analytics or data warehousing stream, go ahead and do them. It will be helpful. Computer networking, I'll go ahead and do this because these are the core services. So let's see what all it is doing. It's going to give you introduction to EC2, create a VPC using CloudFormation. This is really important. So you're going to create a virtual private network. You have done that manually through in our cloud practitioner certification, but doing it through CloudFormation, which is a way to automate your AWS infrastructure, will be really helpful. Maintaining high availability with auto scaling. So once you have a VPC, once you have EC2, then you're going to create this auto scaling group. This will be really important. So go ahead and do this one for sure. Deployment management. This will also be useful. You will be using Elastic Beanstalk, CloudFormation, OpsWork. So you'll be able to understand, appreciate the difference between the Elastic Beanstalk and the OpsWork, that when to use one. Storage and CDN. Again, this will be useful because this will be more of a setting up a static website on S3 and delivering content to CloudFront. I'll have to request to please go on mute. Okay. Websites and web apps, I think. If you have time, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll chuck that big data on AWS. Again, if you're going for big data specialty, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, you can leave it for now. SysOps Administrator Associate is fine. So if you see, there are 2 quests. One quest out of them is specifically for Solution Architect Associate, and we have for Solution Architect Professional also. So even for Associate one, if you see, it does not cover everything, but it does cover quite good. So it does cover IAM. It does cover introduction to EC2, how to cache static files and deliver through Amazon CloudFront, and how to create AWS VPC with CloudFormation. So these are the concepts that you'll have to focus on. So always map it to your exam guide, where you have like which are FAQs you should be looking into. So that will tells you EC2, S3, VPC, Route 53, RDS, SQS. So any labs you're able to find around these, please go ahead and do that. It will be really helpful. So that's on the labs. And but in case if you find difficulty in following like reading a lot of text and doing labs on your own, and you want to go for any paid course, then yeah, Cloud Guru, Linux Academy, digital cloud training, all of them are good, and there are a lot of that are available on Udemy. You can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll be covering few of the concepts here using this resources that are freely available, and hopefully that should be good enough to get you started for you to explore it on your own by doing the labs and reading the FAQs.